I was first introduced to yoga after I hurt my back. Some people get into yoga because it feels good. But for me, it was like, this is supposed to be medicine, and it's not always feeling like medicine. And I was finding things that were helping my back and finding things that were aggravating my back within the yoga practice, even as I was teaching. And I didn't know why. It forced me into learning the details, summarizing it really simply, just trying to have a really clear why. Yoga, hopefully in all of its forms, gives you an opportunity to learn to regulate your nervous system. Synergy, I think, is just far more specific about that, far more detailed. Synergy yoga is probably the most balanced exercise that we can do. Physiological health, physical health, nervous system, mindfulness, cardiovascular health, ticks so many boxes. In the 90s, as everyone was trying to figure out what do we do with Ashtanga to make it more accessible so people stop getting injured, or what do we do with Iyengar to make it more fun. And I know Simon, I love the way he teaches. Him and Bianca were trying to figure this out. His influence is now, it's less obvious, but when I did my first teacher training in Melbourne in 2012, almost every teacher that I had studied with him at some point, because he was the OG. He evolved and he changed what he was doing because he was finding better and better ways to do things. But he kind of left the yoga mainstream at some point. The yoga mainstream went off in its own direction. And he wasn't interested in that. He's like, he's not doing things to be popular. He was doing things because they're the better way of doing them. Who's a really good doctor? The doctor that you go to and gives you what you want, or the doctor that you go to and gives you what you need? And I would say the same with yoga teachers. We should ideally be able to create something that meets the need that you have for enjoyment and of something that's good for your body. Ideally want to meet both of those. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
And we're back for the Core Flow podcast. Just to say thank you so much for everybody that listened to episode 1 with Simon Borg-Olivier, who is referenced by our lovely contributor this time, Stefan Camilleri, founder of Lanka Yoga. I saw him a few years ago practicing Synergy, and I knew him from a while back, and it was such a delight to see him practicing this way, and also how he communicated it. And I thought he'd be great to talk to about the basic fundamentals, some of the characteristics that make Synergy a unique movement style that you can apply. So we talked a little bit about the principles of active movement, moving from the core, natural breathing and flow. And we also touched on Stefan's journey from, let's say, a less than sensitive masculine culture in Australia into a need for healing on the physical level, on the psychological level. Stefan used the term psychological relaxation, which just struck me with how deep his insight is. He encourages people to look up the Yoga Synergy style and to see how they can incorporate these magnificent benefits into their yoga practice, or even their movement practice as well. He talks about his experiences and challenges with running and his recent addiction to lifting weights, which he caught as a habit forming. And though his practice is only just about 12 years at the time of recording, he started teaching quite early, and he was also blessed with an initiation into the business of yoga from Sadie Nardini. And he talks a little bit about her style and how it influenced him, how the evolution of yoga was happening from that day, and also how his peers knew about Simon as the big dog.
Maybe the best way to start is to say thank you. Thanks for making some time for me to have a chat and for getting to know me better as well, because I met you once in Melbourne in grassroots yoga. I don't know if you remember.
I do, yeah. It was so long ago.
I reckon 2015 that I saw you and you were teaching in Australia.
Yes.
I'd love to know a little bit of background about your origins of teaching, the sort of styles, ultimately to get to know you, and then to use the methodology and the principles of synergy to understand how we view yoga on the physical level now.
Well, it's quite a story. It's quite a long story anyway. I'll try and kind of condense it a little bit. I was first introduced to yoga after I hurt my back in 2012. I was doing an adult apprenticeship as a mechanical fitter and turner. It's a big, heavy things. We work on bridges. We do engines of ginormous machines and this kind of stuff. And I hurt my back in a really bizarre way. It wasn't like there was some big injury. There was like this kind of small issues with my discs and this kind of stuff, but it was more this chronic pain cycle that I got myself into really quickly. And I had an exercise physiologist who gave me some basic yoga exercises, which were really helpful. And I had an attractive female friend who brought me to a yoga class. And to be honest, I don't think I would have gone if it wasn't someone who was, really a really good friend and really kind of looking out for me.
Yeah.
And, I came from this, at that point in my life, this really, excuse me for using an Australian term, but blokey culture. Like,
bring all of those colloquial terms you need, man.
Good.
Welcome.
But this really like rough, kind of mean. We were talking before we pressed record about whether it's okay to swear or not, because I still have the hangover from working in that environment where everything was a swear word. From if you point at something, you call it a C. If you're trying to explain something very important, it's an F and C. Like, it was really outrageous. So yoga was like, bleh. But this friend of mine dragged me along. My back felt better, but the thing that caught me was I didn't realize how stressed I was or how uncomfortable I was in my own body, in my own skin, until I came out of my first yoga class and went, I feel really good. And I felt really good for like a whole day. And I couldn't wait for the next one. And I was hooked like straight away. And I signed up to my first teacher training probably 3 to 6 months into that.
Wow.
Because I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore. My back was stuffed. I was in pain all the time. I was miserable. I wasn't able to perform in my job. I didn't like it anymore because it was all this kind of negativity. By that point, I'd been injured for 6 months and I was on like workers' compensation insurance. I was at work sometimes. I had other days where I was off because I was in too much pain. I was on anti-inflammatories and they were suggesting not surgery, but like this treatment where they burn your nerves so that the pain cycle stops.
Wow.
And that scared the hell out of me.
Wow.
I can also add in just quickly, my dad was in a wheelchair from a failed back operation. So I didn't want to go anywhere near that stuff. Like, I wasn't interested at all. And so I got into yoga and I got in such a big way because I thought this can save me, can save my back and blah, blah, blah. And I studied like I've never studied before. I had all the books, I was watching videos, I was making all these notes. I'm like, I'm going to be the best student ever. I didn't want to teach, I just wanted to learn because I saw yoga as a way to fix my back because that's what I'd experienced, that it was helping so much. And it's interesting because it didn't fix my back. It definitely helped. But I would argue that my first 3-4 years of yoga, and I was teaching very quickly also, but even as I was teaching, was finding things that were helping my back and finding things that were aggravating my back within the yoga practice.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why at first. Because all I saw an exercise or a movement or a posture, and I would do it, and I would go, okay, does my back feel better or worse? And then I would explore new exercises and movements or postures. But it's more complicated than that because sometimes it would and sometimes it wouldn't. So I came to the conclusion that I didn't really know what I was doing if I didn't have that consistency. I could do the same, I could do downward facing dog today, make my back feel better, do it tomorrow, make my back feel worse. So it forced me into learning the details, or being curious anyway, of the details.
Sounds like you're already pretty curious, though, and already pretty scientific, with this willingness to explore and discover.
It's kind of forced into it. Some people get into yoga because it feels good for their bodies. I think it's a common story for people who were, say, dancers or gymnasts or circus performers or whatever. They're like, oh yeah, this is like what I already do, but easier, but less competitive, let's say. But for me, it was like, this is supposed to be medicine, and it's not always feeling like medicine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to figure it out. And in that journey, because I started with modern vinyasa. Well, what was modern vinyasa? A long time ago now. Like, it's more than 10 years ago. What was modern vinyasa 10 years ago? And that had pretty limited benefits, if I dare say. It was, inhale arms up, exhale fold down, inhale half lift, exhale jump back, inhale up dog, exhale down dog, 5 breaths here. Yeah, it's okay, but limited. And I was introduced to a teacher called Sadie Nardini. Have you heard of her?
So I've seen videos of Sadie Nardini, and Rio, who was a Kiwi guy on the grassroots course that I first studied, shared some videos of her training with me. So that's my familiarity. Talking about the style, I heard Butterasana, and I thought, that is poetry. And I didn't actually appreciate Butterasana until kind of a few years ago, So there's sort of, she drops some kind of wisdom with the sort of trepidatious leaning into appropriating the term asana and shoveling an English word at the front of it.
Oh, but that was one of her favourite things.
But I think that's our entitlement somewhat, being masters of the universe that we are, that we can, sort of just splice together things. However, it was wise ultimately, because it paints a picture. It gives a visceral way to connect to the liquidity of the body, which I think is really beautiful.
I mean, she had a methodology that had some really interesting and good stuff in it. When I met her, she'd created her own style, as was the thing back in the day where you create, the Barkin method, or you have Jiva Mukti, and everyone was trying to create the next Ashtanga. So she had her own terminology, she had her own sequencing ideas, she had her own cues.
Yeah.
A lot of it was really good, but my introduction to her was really bizarre. I was teaching at this point. I've probably been teaching for 6 months or less. And back in 2014, there weren't many male yoga teachers in Melbourne. I could probably have counted them on my hands at the time. So it was very easy for me to get work teaching, and then my classes were quite busy.
That's the same as me. Yeah. I started teaching in Melbourne in 2015, and I couldn't be proud about it. It was like a numbers game.
It was too easy. It was too easy back in the day. And my classes were also popular, and I think part of the reason was just simply because I was a guy. People would look at the schedule, and it'd be young girl, young girl, young girl, young girl. Oh, who's that? That's not a girl's name.
A man?
Exactly.
A man on the mat?
What? They gave me some. It's an Australian Yoga Academy, and they gave me some kind of quite busy classes. And one night, I'm signing in to 40 people that were coming or whatever. And at this point, I was quite up myself. I have to say, I'm on a side track, but I transitioned quite quickly from timid guy working in a factory to yoga man, where all the girls come to learn their yoga practice from. Ha ha ha! My ego really.
You found a tasty new persona.
Oh man, it got me for a while, that thing. But here I am signing in the 40 students for the night, and this person walks up the stairs. I'm like, I've never met her before, and there's an American accent. I'm like, wow, cool, American. And then I look at the poster on the wall. I look at her. I look at the poster on the wall. I'm like, oh shit. You're the Sadie person who's doing all this teacher training, these workshops here. And she's like, I heard you're the real deal. I was like, oh God, here we go. So front row center, I've got Sadie Nardini, who I only knew from the posters. And as I'm teaching my literally back then inhale, arms up, exhale, fold down, inhale, look forward, with a good playlist and the kind of, that's why my classes were okay, because my playlist was good and because my breath cues were on point. It was all this stuff. And she's just not doing what I'm saying. Like I'm saying, inhale, lift up, high lunge. And she kind of pauses for a moment, rounds her spine, rolls up through her center and lifts her arms like a dancer.
Cool.
I'm like, that's something weird going on here. And she did that the whole class. And then after the class, we had a chat and she said, you've got something. Like as a teacher, I think you're going to go somewhere with it, which was nice of her to say. And then she had a comma. There's always when there's a pause and an expression, you always have to worry. There was a pause and an expression, and she said, "But your transitions are rubbish." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she's like, "You're not even cueing how to move. You're just saying a breath and another pose." Because that's what I'd learned to do. And she's like, "Come this weekend to my course, and I'll teach you how to teach the movements." And she had at least a methodology for movement. And this butter asana, these words like broken giraffe, she used to say. But like you break the pose and then you come from the center out, which we use with the synergy stuff.
Wow.
Also.
It's so cool to know. I had no idea Sadie was teaching from the Kanda.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but she doesn't call it that because she had her own brand. She put herself in a little corner somewhere. And I remember in that weekend of training with her, Simon came up a lot. And I'd already known of Simon because he'd been the teacher of some of my other teachers.
Okay.
And people would say, this is so much like what Simon does, except. And there'd be these little differences. And that was, so that was another kind of introduction to hearing this guy's name again and again and going, oh, this synergy stuff is interesting. But by that point, I was in it with her. And I taught with her for a couple of years and assisted her with a bunch of stuff. It's real, even by the perspective that we have now with the synergy stuff, it's still really good.
Yeah.
We would still look at it and go, yeah, it's not exactly what we do, but it's logical. It's from the core. It's fluid. It ticks a whole bunch of boxes. She just overbreathes. That's my complaint of what she was doing back then. I'm not 100% with what she's doing now.
Right.
But she recognized that the breath cues that we were using in vinyasa classes were unnatural.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you say inhale, lift up, you lift the chest as you breathe in, you arch the back, and then you lift up from your back.
Yeah.
So she recognized that, but her solution, rather than just breathe normally, don't worry about the breath cues, her solution was, so first breathe in, then roll up by breathing out, which is a round spine. Then as your arms lift up, breathe in again. So it solved the problem of the breath forcing a strange movement of the spine, but it doubled the problem of hyperventilation because all of a sudden you're breathing twice as much as you would in a normal yoga class. Because for one movement, you're not just doing an inhale or an exhale, you're doing an inhale and an exhale. So solutions, some different problems, whatever, but I learned a lot from her. Heaps.
Sure.
And not just as details of how to move, details of postures, this kind of stuff, but how to be a yoga teacher from a business perspective. She was disgustingly successful and she'd kind of let you know about it. I'll never forget her telling me after one morning assisting her, and I wasn't getting paid, keep in mind, I wasn't getting paid to assist her. And we walk out to get a coffee and she opens her phone up. She was on her phone quite a lot. She's like, guess how much I made while we were teaching? And I said, well, I started doing the maths. So I said, okay, so there's 20 people here and we've done 1/4 of the course. So it's maybe like $1,000. And she goes, no, on my online stuff. And I go, oh, separate from this. And she's like, $4,000. Because at that point she was selling these teach trainings for $1,000. She's like, I had 4 sales this morning, $4,000. So she really opened my mind to, oh, wow, this is actually, you don't have to be a poor yoga teacher. You can be a smart business person within this. And she really encouraged me and pushed me to do things like run workshops. I said, no, I'm not ready. She said, Stefan, if you can teach some of the stuff I can teach, you know things that are different to what other people know, teach workshops. So I started teaching workshops. She said, run retreats. I said, I can't run a retreat. And she's like, okay, come with me for one, watch, and then do your own. And I did, So I learnt a lot from her in a lot of different ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So this must have been about 2013.
No, I met her 2014.
Okay, so you'd marinated in being a teacher for the Australian Yoga Academy for a couple of years by that point, or a year and a half?
No, I practiced yoga for the first time 2012. I started my teacher training 2013, started teaching 2014.
Yeah.
So I met her really not long after I started teaching.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
That's handy.
Yeah, that's more or less the timeline. So I'd already started teaching, and it wasn't just at Australian Yoga Academy. I did that thing that all the teachers in Melbourne and probably all around the world do. I taught at 55 different places. After I met her, then I kind of ended up not teaching in Melbourne so much because I was kind of going all over the place. I was in India, and then I was in Europe, then I was in America. I was kind of just being a hippie on the road, teaching a bit, studying a bit, spending all my money, trying to make some of it back, which was fun for a few years. And I think the Sadie, my professional relationship with her, whatever you want to call it, lasted a couple of years, and then it kind of fizzled out as I started doing different things and she started doing different things. She doesn't even teach that style of stuff anymore. She was trying to make it a big thing, and now she does like fitness yoga and face yoga and HIIT yoga.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very different.
I think there's another track of conversation altogether there, which is like the sort of sociological, like what is the medicine of the moment. You know, it's interesting. I think I'm sad to say, and I hope by the time this podcast has been out a few years, it's kind of irrelevant by that point. But I'm seeing like it's a slow awakening of like people that are interested in the more somatic and, you know, nervous system benefiting mental health movement approach. It's still a little bit like underground, although I think it's bubbling up in quite a big way. And there's a massive call for like, I met some people last night that were, you know, big in gymnastics and athletics and referred to yoga as stretchy bendy stuff, you know, like in the common understanding, you know, like that it's interesting that commercial like entrance to initiate people that are actually ready to go deeper, I think is this bigger, like grotesque, like let's burn a load of energy thing, you know, in order to, and I think it's just I think it's the soma of the people. It's needed if in a certain sense that people need, because the society as a whole has this idea that let's just burn the nerve endings and that'll solve the problem. In that mindset, you need quite a drastic intervention, which I think is like sort of aggressive movement really to like kind of shake people and wake people into their bodies. You know, it takes for a lot of people, I think for, you know, I don't want to be too cynical and pessimistic, but I think in modern Western predominantly English-speaking culture, it's kind of that face-shaking, you know, wake-up call of movement that might be required. Yeah. So Sadie's like sort of performing that role, maybe in some way, you know, to draw a loose parallel with like, I can't remember who it was that put Krishnamacharya on the path of like, get out there and get people moving, you know, go and teach yoga to the world in this way. You know, how much of that was his own like sort of logic and wisdom, how much of it was divine intervention, if you will, or how much of it was the seer going, this world is like pretty desensitized. They might need a bit of work before they can get to Pratyahara.
Well, I mean, on that, if you look at photos of Krishnamacharya and his students from Mysore, and you look at what they're doing the most ridiculous stuff because it catches attention. If you look at Iyengar's book, Light on Yoga, the first, what we would consider like yoga manual, yoga book, most of the poses no one is ever going to do. Mm-hmm. So what's the purpose of that? It's to attract attention, and because that's what we believe that people want to see. You know, it's advertising. And probably the modern equivalent of that is Instagram. And who are the most popular yoga teachers on Instagram? It's not Sadie Nardini and Simon Borg-Olivier. Mm-hmm. It's Dylan Werner and Patrick Beach, and the guys who can do the most interesting and impressive stuff with their bodies. So I think part of it also stems from that, because from that becomes the expectation for what you're going to get in yoga. If that's what you see as yoga and you go to a yoga class, that's what you're expecting. Stretchy, bendy, handstandy stuff, whatever. And if you go to a yoga class and one of us is teaching this and moving my fingers and gently moving my spine, they'll go, well, this isn't what I signed up for. But not only that, but I actually think a lot of schools, teachers, studios, whatever you want to call them, they also have the same thinking of this is what people want.
Yes.
This is what people expect.
Yeah.
That's probably the most common question I get on teacher trainings is, this stuff is really nice, but it's not what people want, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting question.
It's massive. This is massive. We could do... I really hope to talk to you and to get to know you better by chatting again and again over the years.
Yep.
And to see if we can unpack a lot of that stuff, because we just entered a huge wormhole there, which is about people pleasing. And, how much of a cultural trait is that, and how does it really benefit us as a species? Is that a great way to
I mean, just really quickly on that one, it's about, let's say, the paradigm between what people want versus what people need. Mm-hmm. And let's say, who's a really good doctor? The doctor that you go to and gives you what you want, or the doctor that you go to and gives you what you need? The one who gives you what you need. So, and I would say the same with yoga teachers. Who are the best yoga teachers? The ones who give you what you need. So I think in the long run, that's always a better strategy to play with, to go with. But it's not the short-term fill your pockets, gain popularity, make lots of friends teaching yoga strategy.
Yeah.
And the other side of that we have to consider is, if you're taking a different path, a different track, and you're saying, no, I think actually what you need is more gentle movement, more gentle breathing, whatever, then you're in an argument. And a lot of people aren't very good at arguing. And when I say that, I don't mean they're not good at winning arguments. Mm-hmm. I mean that they look bad after an argument.
And maybe even feel bad.
Yeah, because as soon as you're presenting a different opinion, a different way of doing things, you inevitably put yourself in conflict with the norm and what people expect to be the norm, or their understanding of something. So you're in a conflict straight away by offering a different opinion, a different way of doing things. How you handle that conflict is really important and really difficult. And most people don't know how to handle conflict. They don't realize they're in a conflict. They just know that they've got the best information, and they might have the best information, but they're all of a sudden in an argument.
Yeah.
And they're accidentally saying that everything that you believe is wrong, accidentally saying that.
Yeah.
Then you've lost it. It doesn't matter if you were right anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if breathing naturally might be more beneficial than over-breathing, than breathing a lot. You've lost the argument because you're in an argument.
Yeah, conflating, information with knowing. It's like this sort of inherent bias that we're conditioned into, I believe. From my perspective, it's that knowledge is somehow something you can get from someone else, rather than, Patanjali's view that the first most important source of knowledge is direct perception. That's it's so culturally conditioned out of us that direct perception is the most viable and valuable and informative source of knowledge.
Interesting, yeah. We can pick up so much from that. But having said that, to dare start an argument, is that our perceptions are also sometimes giving us the wrong information. And what I mean by that is, I have this often argument, or often conversation about yin yoga with my teacher training students, because everybody loves yin yoga. And why do they love yin yoga? Because it feels so good. Mm-hmm. The feedback they get from their body is positive. They get relaxed. They feel flexible. The most important thing is they're so relaxed. And they said, how can it be bad for you if you're relaxed? I'm like, I'm not saying it's bad for you. I'm saying there's elements of risk and challenge and compromise within this practice. But they're like, how can it be bad if it feels so good? And I said, by that argument, heroin's amazing.
Yeah.
Heroin apparently feels better than anything ever.
Yeah.
So if we were going just on our feelings, then we should all take heroin, shouldn't we? But we have to understand where that feeling is coming from. So to use the yin yoga thing as an example, where is that euphoric, calm, relaxed, dozy feeling after a yin class coming from? It's coming from the release of endorphins from overstretching, endorphins, endogenous morphine, heroin.
Yeah.
Same thing,
I suppose then, if we dive deeper into that, what is direct perception, that sort of pre-cognitive place? Does it include, past knowledge and opinion and raga and dvesha and likes and dislikes? I would posit probably not.
Interesting.
And that the intelligent information that Patanjali alludes to in my perception is, knowledge of the direct environment. So sort of information from the nervous system rather than the intellect.
And we can get so much from that, from that perception. There's so much to learn from that. That's like you said, that's beyond what you can be taught necessarily.
And it can keep you cool-headed in an argument.
Yeah.
I've found myself so much more regulated, like in conflict, whilst practicing synergy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like, wow. I'm not physiologically triggered. This is cool. But now what?
Well, I mean, yoga hopefully in all of its forms gives you an opportunity to learn to regulate your nervous system. Synergy, I think, is just far more specific about that, far more detailed on how to do it. It's rather than how I felt with the yoga I was practicing beforehand, it would happen accidentally sometimes. I would be regulated because I did the right pose, let's say, but I didn't understand the mechanisms, how it was working or why it was working. But studying with Simon and learning the synergy methodology, it's given me kind of the keys to the Lamborghini in one way. Like now I get why these things work and how they work, and I can take advantage of them even if I'm not doing the correct yoga pose at the time. I could be sitting in a meeting. I've been in some very stressful meetings the last couple of years. I was once on a table there was 9 lawyers and me. That was fun. 2 on my side and 7 on the other side. And I was stressed out of my goddamn mind. Like you wouldn't, but the physiological stress that I felt was, I've never felt that before. And I was doing synergy. Every breath that I took, I'm okay, relax pelvic floor, 1, 2, 3, relax, expand the belly, the shoulders, fingers, head, neck, everything. I was doing everything.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I was able to regulate myself to some degree.
And them.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And in the old days, I would have had to excuse myself, gone outside and done shoulder stand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that worked.
Wow.
But I didn't know how it worked.
Sure.
So it was a, different thing. So anyway, I'm sidetracked, but that'll happen a lot.
It's really interesting to talk about everything. I just want to give you a perspective of an Englishman who visited Australia for a few years at the time of practicing more yoga because of, guess what, a back injury. And
what?
Yeah. So I had a cycling injury in London in about 2010. Had a doctor who was Indian who said, my uncle told me to do sun salutations. And I'd already been practicing yoga before that point. And this Indian doctor recommended yoga. And then that brought me into practicing every day and understanding the sort of psychological benefits. So, when I came to Australia, I'd planned to practice some yoga there, but actually do my training in India because I thought that would be the best thing to do at the time. But I understood so much. Thankfully, my course included mindfulness. Shout out to Grassroots Yoga. And they included quite a lot of mindfulness in the process. So, I had this big drop into meditation and awareness in such a beautiful way, and I was like, yeah, this is the place to do it, not India. I thought that as an Englishman, man, like the standard and the quality of yoga in Australia is like off the chart compared to London.
Really?
Man,
really?
It was a world away back then. I don't know, I've posited this with people, like on the physical side, perhaps, it's always a phenomenon that Australians compete in the Olympics, considering the small population, outdoorsy people, like quite physically, switched on or just interested. Make it fun. Maybe that's the secret. And then also that sort of proximity to Asia, I think sort of gives like a kind of, a clear channel to a lot of ancient wisdom as well, because it wasn't just the physical that I was impressed by Australians. I was like having these breakthroughs and feeling really connected through the English words they were giving me. I had no idea what philosophy was embedded in it at that point, but I just knew that I felt like this is crazy. I need to train here, not anywhere else.
It's really interesting.
That was way before I discovered Simon. So just to give you the perspective that, like, that's my personal opinion. It doesn't make it fact, but it was my experience through having experienced both. You know, like, good. I always went for senior teachers in London. It were great, but I was just surprised by how high the standard was. Sorry, I should say the standard was.
Standard.
It was brilliant. I was like, right, so this is the place to train. And then, Simon's been there, and he has been like such an influence. You know, I mean, I listened to a lot of yoga philosophy and scholars talking at SOAS, and they're aware of him as a teacher. A lot of those old school guys. So he's sort of been there in the background. Yeah, it's.
If I could come in on that point,
please,
is that he wasn't always in the background.
Yeah, of course.
He was leading the charge of modern yoga in Australia, and I think that influence actually went overseas as well. Right at the start of this kind of vinyasa flow modern yoga thing, you know, as everyone was trying to figure out what do we do with Ashtanga to make it more accessible, to make it more so that everybody can do it, so that people stop getting injured, or this kind of stuff. Or what do we do with Iyengar to make it more fun and more accessible in a different way? You know, him and Bianca in the 90s were trying to figure this out, you know. And you're right, his influence is now, it's less obvious. But, you know, when I did my first teacher training in Melbourne, almost every teacher that I had studied with him at some point, because he was the OG, the big dog of Australian yoga.
Thank you for that.
And it's interesting how he didn't stay at that kind of popular... He evolved and he changed what he was doing because he was finding better and better ways to do things. But he kind of left the yoga mainstream at some point because the yoga mainstream went off in its own direction. And he wasn't interested in that. He's like, he's not doing things to be popular. He was doing things because they're the better way of doing them.
Yeah.
And because that's what he enjoys and he likes. So
it's interesting. That goes back to something you were saying earlier against this idea of just conflict and argument, because there is, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds with this. I wonder whether it's a thread to follow, but let's try. About him experiencing a lot of people, disagreeing with some of the things he says, basically based on dogma of what they've learned from that, whatever training course they went on, and whatever sort of whispers and echoes turned into this is what you should be doing, this is the breath, this is the alignment, you know, misunderstanding that is so popular.
Yeah.
I
have lots of thoughts on this, actually.
Yeah, let's hear them.
As soon as you're presenting something, and I mentioned this earlier, that's against the mainstream, you're in an argument. Now, if you present it in a way in which suggests that what you're doing is the only way and everything else is wrong, then you're going to lose 50% of the people straight away. Sometimes the way that people who are teaching a better way, like objectively look at the science, look at the data, look at the biomechanics, say, of a movement, look at the physiology of the breath, for example. They might be teaching a better way objectively. If it goes against the mainstream and they don't know how to make the argument, then they're in big trouble. I've heard stories of my old students who I've sent to Simon and who've had that experience with him. Now, it's not to say he's not good at making an argument, but it's just that sometimes it's so different and he presents it in a way that's a bit like, and you have to do it this way. If you don't, you're going to get brain cancer.
What did your can you define what that experience they had with him was? I'm not sure what you meant by that.
So maybe I'll try and present it in a different way. Their worldview was so in conflict with what he was presenting in the workshop in regards to yoga and the body and everything else. And he was presenting it in such a way that made it feel to them that his way was the only way and that everything else was wrong.
Sure.
That they were so turned off that they left his workshop. And I know Simon. I love the way he teaches. And I can imagine him doing his kind of funny it was about the breath that really got them, where he was talking about breathing less and blah, blah, blah. And he was saying, if you breathe too much, you'll end up with brain cancer, And they took that as so you're basically telling me that everything that I believe and that I teach they own a studio, these students of mine, to my hundreds of students, you're telling me that I'm going to give them all brain cancer. That's how they interpreted it.
Yeah.
And then they went, no, I'm not even listening anymore. And they left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's about how difficult and how delicate you have to be in presenting this information. And I've had the same conflict and the same challenge as Simon, because even from my earlier trainings, even before I'd met Simon, I was still teaching some of the same stuff and some of the things that I'd understood about the body and about whatever. So I was finding myself at odds with the yoga mainstream. And I used to have arguments with my students. 2016, my first teacher training, I can remember an argument in a lecture with a student.
Wow.
It's embarrassing to look back at it. And I was saying, no, you don't understand. That's not how the body works. You can imagine. And I was sure of it. I understood. I was right. And they had a different opinion.
Yeah.
But the way that I was communicating it was that you're wrong. You don't get it.
Yeah.
And it's changed.
This is interesting.
Yeah. And it's changed the way not just then, but I've evolved it through time. And now with the other teachers that I have work with me, that's the main thing I work on with them.
Yeah. Go on.
Is how to communicate these ideas.
Yeah.
Because you're literally going to have someone who for the last 10 years, 15 years, dude, I've had students in their 70s that have been doing arms up, shoulders down, big breath in for 40 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So you can't tell them in one sentence, you're wrong and I'm right, and you've been hurting your shoulders the whole time.
But
you've been breathing the wrong way.
It's even more than that, though, isn't it? It's having an awareness that they might interpret it like that, even though what you're giving it's not cut and dry. You're not saying it is like this, but it's so easy for people to interpret it that way when they're stuck to a narrow worldview.
Exactly, and you have to be so careful about the words that you use, the language that you use to communicate these ideas.
This gets me a little bit into something else, like non-violent communication. Are you familiar with that?
I love non-violent communication. I love it. I teach it on the training.
I started to think about it when you were talking about what people want in yoga, because Marshall Rosenberg talks about needs. And what do we need? Isn't it a beautiful parallel?
Dude. Oh, mate. I mean, I didn't know, to be honest, you were into nonviolent communication, because that's this way that I'm trying to, that I'm suggesting that we have to communicate as teachers, especially if we're presenting something different, is 100%. It has to be in a non-violent way, in a non-judgmental way, in a being aware that the needs that you're meeting are not only the need to have a better understanding or for knowledge or whatever, but we also have other needs. Like I have the need to feel important. I have the need to be doing my best, the need not to hurt other people, all these other things. You have to take all of that into consideration when you're presenting something, because otherwise you're just hurting people, even if you're trying to give them the best thing ever. So I'm trying to give you a Ferrari that doesn't, it burns carbon dioxide and it poops out oxygen. It's the best thing ever. But if I'm doing that in a way that suggests to them somehow that they're wrong, or that they've been doing something wrong, or worse, that they've been hurting people. I mean, can you imagine that feeling of someone that you hopefully trust a little bit coming up and saying, hey, this thing you've been telling people for the last 10 years, it's wrong and it hurts people and it might be giving them cancer. Like, wow. So can you present it in a way that's like, actually the science says, this, or this is the way something works. And maybe if we're taking that information, we should be then trying to do it this way rather than that way. And then the question will often be, well, why has everybody told me to do it this way? Or why have I learnt that? And then you have to have an answer for that as well. You know, you can't just say because they're wrong, because then you're not insulting them, you're insulting their teachers. It's the same thing. So you have to also have answers for this.
Sounds like you're observing to some extent like the characteristics of people as well, and what their needs might be as well as an individual when you're on your training, which sounds really beautiful. I've not plugged it yet, but it definitely needs to happen. It's Lanka Yoga, and that's where Stefan offers synergy-informed trainings, as well as it's a lot of richness, which we're uncovering in this. So I suggest anyone listening that's interested, have a look.
Thank you, mate.
Dive in. Yeah. And that sort of wider perspective of like wants and needs, I think sort of makes a bit of an explanation about, a jackal culture. And I use jackal in the term of a language, for NVC, nonviolent communication, where Marshall Rosenberg posits that there's a jackal way of speaking, which is on that right and wrong axis, and it actually is void of needs and can even block ourselves from our true needs. And it sounds like what you're doing, Stefan, is trying to uncover, first of all, like your own needs, and they sound like that affirmation and recognition that your voice is truly important, and that you care about people and you want people to feel good. And that's a decent one, because it's based on a need, like a real need of who you authentically are. You're teaching that to people at Lanka Yoga. That sounds really, really beautiful.
I mean, there's a whole lot of language that we use in nonviolent communication that might also be, if you haven't heard of it before, it might be overwhelming to think of, what is a need and what is a want and all this kind of stuff. Maybe another way of kind of summarizing it really simply about the way that I'm approaching things is just trying to have a really clear why for everything I'm teaching and for how I'm communicating, So the why, for example, would be I'm trying to give maximum benefit with minimum risk to the students, and if they're going to become yoga teachers, to their students into the future as well, and then why am I communicating in such a careful way? Because I don't want to cause harm. I don't want to cause pain. I don't want to cause friction, so I have to, there's a word that we don't try and use in nonviolent communication, but I choose to communicate specifically, with those whys, those needs in mind. Doesn't matter if my information is right or wrong or whatever. Trying to give the best, trying to create the most positive change with the least amount of friction. That's kind of a summary, isn't it?
It sounds very in line and honouring Simon's approach. I hear him talking in such similar terms. And he says, let it feel good, which is interesting in this wider context of, if say people are a bit more interested in aggressive forms of movement, then they just want to feel good and they're taking that approach to feeling good. But he's also providing a need, which I think is more fundamental to that want to feel good. You can find that within the need of a sense of safety.
Yeah.
And if your movement is that bridging those 2 points, it's going to be beneficial and hopefully reach people widely.
I mean, I would argue it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, it doesn't have to be what you want or good for you. We should ideally be able to create something that meets the need that you have for enjoyment or for expression or for feeling strong things, whatever it is. At the same time, meets your need, which I assume you have, and now I'm not talking to you, but talking to, say, the hypothetical student, of something that's good for your body.
Yeah.
You ideally want to meet both of those. You don't want to say, no, you can't get what you want. You can't have what... I know you really like doing all these strong movements and everything. No, you can't have them. You have to do this because it's good for you. That's like saying eat your vegetables, don't eat your cornflakes. But wouldn't it be better if we could have both of those needs met? And maybe we could do that by giving the power back to the person and saying, here are the risk factors of these things. Here are ways of doing them safer. Now you go and do what you want. I'm not your dad, and here are some things that maybe you could avoid if you were thinking to it, whatever. But I mean, let's take an example. What's your opinion on headstand? Where do you land on headstand, as an example.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll land actively from the core with natural breathing and flow. But
Very good.
Maybe it's a soft landing, like a hovercraft, as opposed to a hit and hope. Well, I don't teach it, and
Exactly.
I taught it at my class on Wednesday. And for the benefit of the recording, Stefan is putting his hands behind his head in a seated position and making his elbows look like elephant tusks, and then digging his tusks forwards and moving from the core in what he would call flexion, extension, spinal flow. But essentially what I'm saying is I'm doing a headstand whilst in a seated position. I'm teaching people about the shoulders. I'm feeling warm in my head. My head feels really nice and warm, and it's lovely.
Yeah.
But that's how I teach headstand. I don't go into public classes at all anymore and expect anyone to put the body weight on the head, let alone the forearms.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the interesting thing, is because there's so many arguments for headstand being like the best, the most beneficial, the most, and even from Simon, of that's where you're going with your practices, you're going towards this kind of stuff. But then we also have the counter side to that, is that all of our necks are stuffed from using our phones and laptops and everything else, and they're weak because we never carry anything on our head. So probably we should be doing things like you just suggested rather than the pose itself. It doesn't make the pose bad, So when I'm, for example, talking about headstand on teacher training, I talk about the risks that are involved in it, the reasons that it's more challenging for us than it was for Indians 100 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, it's up to you what you do with it, And then to discourage people from teaching it, and now I'm giving away maybe a bit of a kind of trade secret, and if anyone who's listening to this is then going to do my training in the future, you'll know where I'm going with this. But you can kind of scare people out of doing that. So rather than saying don't teach headstand because it's bad, you can say, students get injured in headstands, and injuries it can be really, really bad. And that can be really, really bad for the teacher who's teaching during the class. And I give some examples of some stories, some things from for example, the science of yoga, which is some really interesting injuries, especially around the neck, some exploration of those. And then let them make the decision. You're empowering them to make the decision. Yeah. And depending on their value set, they'll do it or they won't do it. It's up to them. But it's very unlikely after the kind of speech that I give in teacher training that they'll be first class. Go for it. Let's everyone just go to headstand. It's fine.
Yeah. And also, just to go back onto your phrasing of that, it's not you that's sort of expounding the dangers of it. It's the facts that you've discovered.
Exactly. Yeah, you're pointing to actual things.
Yeah.
This story, and it could be just an anecdote, this story, this person. One of the anecdotes I use is a friend, another male yoga teacher who used to teach in Melbourne, crazy neck pain. Couldn't get on top of it. Physios, chiropractors, rolfing experts, everything. And someone just suggested he stop doing headstand. His neck pain went away.
Yeah.
And this was like a 27-year-old full-time yoga teacher, super healthy guy, and ended up with chronic neck pain until he stopped doing headstand. So let those anecdotes and or some bigger stories, some research, whatever, speak for themselves. It shouldn't be ideally your opinion. And if it is, then you could say it as your opinion. So therefore, with all of that body of evidence, my opinion is that maybe you shouldn't do it.
Stefan, I think you've given me a new anecdote to use there, because it's a great fairy tale because it has a happy ending. I think people can really get behind that version of the story, so I'm going to be using that one.
Yeah, good. Go for it, please. Yeah.
So there's some insights into questions and ways we can inquire during our yoga practice. More importantly, that inquiry being part of the practice can also guide us towards the adequate and appropriate expression of a balanced state of mind and body. I'm loving hearing Stefan express these pointers, these prompts, these engagement questions that bring us into self-inquiry. One of the most important facets of a true yoga practice. I found a lot of inspiration and learning myself through listening to Stefan's approach to teaching. Next, we get into some of the details about how these inquiries can be broached when we get into movement proper, when we talk about core bracing and its effects, and the stress response related to breathing, the effects physiologically and physically of pulling in the core, hyperventilating, and how to avoid some of the common pitfalls from yoga practice. I want to talk to you about active movement from the core with natural breathing and flow.
Please.
What does active movement mean for you?
I want to have a very strange answer to this, if that's okay.
That's perfect.
And I often do this also on trainings. What would be the opposite of that? What's the alternative?
Hyperactive or passive?
Okay, so let's think about passive movement and the benefits of passive movement. Does it make sense? Is it going to make you stronger to move your leg with your arms?
Wow. See,
is it going to make...
You get people to just really spell out how pointless passive movement is, basically.
I'm not suggesting that it's pointless. I'm just trying to explore what it actually is.
This is great.
You know, I'm not saying it's pointless. It might, in some circumstances, it works really well.
This is great for me, but I think the listeners just like, what are they on about? Because I'm not sure how versed people are with this really at the moment. Well, how would you define a passive movement?
Passive movement is a movement that doesn't involve the part of the body that you're moving itself. But it's like moving my leg using my arm, or moving my spine by allowing gravity. Whereas an active movement is my arm moves my arm, my leg moves my own leg, my spine moves my torso, the muscles of my torso move my torso. So I find it quite helpful to go into the opposite sometimes, to really explore what that looks like. And if we were in a, say, class setting, a workshop setting, a training setting, then to feel that also. And not to demonize it, because, passive movement also has a place. But let's then compare that to active movement, and then let's talk about the benefits of passive movement, and let's talk about the benefits of active movement, So, for example, passive movement, if you keep using your arms to move your legs around, your arms to move your torso, your arms, your arm muscles will get stronger. That's a benefit.
So, example, if you pull your legs into lotus, you will get stronger arms from doing that. Is that the proposition?
They're not going to get heaps stronger, but let's take the example of a pose I use on the training, which is standing with one knee to the chest, Ekapada, Pavanmuktasana, right? If I use my hands to lift my leg, I'm using my biceps, my back muscles. And, if I do that enough, I'll get stronger arm muscles and back muscles. If I do active movement, I'm not using my arm muscles at all. I'm using my leg, my hip flexors, my core muscles, these kinds of things. So it's one really interesting moment I had on a teach training was explaining exactly this. And then the student saying, but I also want strong arms. And I said, good, I want strong arms too. So how can we strengthen our arms, And then someone in the back puts their arms up and says, we can go to the gym. And I said, okay, good point. Yes, if I want strong arms, I can go to the gym. But I'm wondering, can I still strengthen my arms doing yoga, doing these movements? And we'd already just learnt the principle of resistance. You push and you pull. And I said, would it be possible that I might strengthen my arms if I pull against my leg and push against my hands? And then we try it, and it's like, yes, I can feel my arm muscles. It's like, great. So if we use the principle of resistance, sometimes we also get stronger arms. Isn't this great? God, I've got an argument for everything.
You highlight something nice and useful there, though, which is, I'm thinking about other yoga styles not involving a lot of pulling. And people saying, I supplement my yoga practice with going climbing or, hanging off a bar or something like that. And you're talking about active resistance, knee to the chest while standing. And then that, that is baked in, that there's that beautiful sort of balance as well, I think, in some of the synergy fundamentals.
Yes, there is. But I would also make the argument that this other person made, that it's a pretty good idea to supplement our yoga practice with other forms of movement and exercise, because although I would argue, as I assume you would also, that synergy is pretty balanced in the way that we use our body, it doesn't tick every box. And like one example, okay, yes, this is a pulling action. So that's something. But we're never pulling from here. And because people can't see me, we're never pulling from our arms being in an upward position downward.
Like hanging from a tree or like hanging from a bar.
Yeah, and like one argument, which is really interesting, that I hear Simon talk about also is that in yoga we never work on grip strength. Some people say that. But then Simon's argument, which is a really good argument, is no, you're supposed to be gripping the floor and you grip different parts of your body. So there's an element of grip strength.
Yeah.
But I promise you, if you're a person who only practices yoga, even if it's synergy, and you go to a monkey bar and hold on, it's difficult. And that's also really good for you, you know. So I make the argument on teacher trainings that synergy yoga is probably the most balanced exercise that we can do. Body, nervous system, mindfulness, cardiovascular health, you know, physiological health, physical health, ticks so many boxes. But even better than just doing synergy would be doing other things also.
Like having a moving lifestyle.
Yeah, and it's actually an argument that I have with Simon in some way. And I'm not at all suggesting that I know more than him, not even, I don't know 2% of what he knows. But I find I feel better in my body if I do yoga synergy and I do other things also. He manages to get everything out of yoga synergy for himself, and that's amazing. And he's the healthiest 64-year-old I've ever met in my whole life. So it works for him. But I feel better if I go to the gym sometimes. I feel better if I go for a run every now and then, if I go for a hike every now and then, if I do different things with my body. So
I've got a bit of an anecdote on that though, really. I mean, I dived into probably a bit over enthusiastically when I started doing synergy. I was probably stretching more than I needed to, but I was always going really slow. And you know, at one point I kind of thought, well, you know, I'm physically active, I can do anything. I went to a HIIT style class. I was invited to it. It's like an ambassador of a place I was teaching. And you know, like a few days later, like my back gave in and I was just like, oh my God, I need to do some occasional explosive movement as well to do this, because the slow movement's beautiful, but you know, now I find that like semi-regular tennis really fits that nicely, you know.
Exactly. And Simon actually makes an argument for this. He says I think 1 to 5%, something, or 2 to 5% of your exercise should be explosive, and he tries to tick that box in his practice with his like crazy movements that he does, or his really advanced postures that he goes into sometimes. But yeah, I have a similar anecdote where I was doing a charity run in 2017, ironically for Gaza, for the war that was going on back then in 2017. And I was helping the organisers, and they were making this big deal about me coming because they're like, oh, you're so fit and blah, 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 because you're this like, you know, yogi person. They were making bets on whether I was going to come first or third or fifth or whatever. I couldn't even finish it. You know why? Because I didn't run. I was very, very fit at what I was doing at yoga, and honestly, it was a 3K run or something. I ran the first kilometer, and then I'm like, I can't run anymore. My heart won't let me. My knee hurts, my hip hurts, my ankle, everything hurt. I was sore for like weeks after that. You know, you're not good at something if you don't do it. So wouldn't it be nice to be good at lifting heavy things sometimes? Wouldn't it be nice to be good at running sometimes? You know, running up a hill or whatever it is. I think that's how you stay really, really healthy. The catch is those things are a bit addictive, aren't they? Like I started training heavy at the gym and I got so hooked. You wouldn't believe it.
Yeah?
Oh my.
When was that, Stefan?
Last year.
Right.
I started doing it because I loved it. I felt really good doing it. And then I got like, I've got to get heavier. I've got to drink more vegan protein. And all of a sudden my joints started hurting. And I'm like, oh, I've done that thing. I always do this. I've gone too far into something. You know, I had to scale it back so that it became part, because it felt good. It feels good. It balanced me off as part of my routine rather than too much, because too much of anything, you're going to get in trouble. Synergy yoga is probably the only thing you can do too much of and not have many downsides from, you know. But running or weightlifting or whatever, like if you're going hard with those things, if you're running to exhaustion, if you're lifting weights to failure, then there's benefit, but there's risk.
Sure.
You know?
I want to kind of extend that on the running thing. I've got two little observations in my own experience, which is when I was a teenager, I hated cross country. I had the capability, but no interest and very little stamina. I found that I was much more about sprinting when I was younger. And then subsequently, I've found since doing less breathing in my practices, which is the movement practice, but also, practice a lot of Simon's breathing advice, and my stamina is up. So I sometimes say that to people: if you are interested in running but you don't want to go slow, do you want more stamina? Because if you build your carbon dioxide tolerance, you'll get it. And then my other one is I went for a sort of synergy informed run, right, one day in 2020 or something like that. I was like, right, not a runner, not a jogger, but I'm going to go out, I'm going to do one, but I'm going to do it. As soon as I start to feel fatigued, I'm just going to stop and walk. And I ran for about, 2 or 3 minutes. And then I stopped and walked and just like regulated fully. And man, for the rest of that day, I had this mad surge of energy. Really? I was like, whoa, I've got like extra energy than I had if I would have not have done that. Yeah, it was palpable, man. I was like, because I don't think I even got around to a yoga practice that day, so I couldn't have put it onto that. Or maybe I did do a yoga practice, but it was so like, I'm so used to it. I was like, this is different. Yeah, like a little 3-minute run. And I was like, wow.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because the first thing that you said, I've had a similar experience, is in the old days when I would run, pre-yoga or pre-synergy, I would run out of steam.
Yeah.
I'd exhaust myself, and my heart, dug, 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 dug. And now when I run, and I don't run all the time, but when I do, I feel from a cardiovascular perspective that I could run forever. But I'm not running at a really fast pace at all. Like, it's pretty relaxed pace. But I just don't feel my lungs, my heart, my breathing as the barrier for going further. I actually feel it's my old man hip, it's my old man knee, it's my foot. I've got, my right side's a bit of a mess from all sorts of things. But I start to feel those things way before I feel anything with breathing, and I have to stop because of them. So I don't know how far I could run these days, but I assume it would be some kilometers.
I have to say, when I did experience that back injury, it sorted itself out pretty quick. Like one thing I've noticed as well since starting this style, I started practicing synergy in about 2017, and the big thing that I've noticed is like my healing time is really good. I've noticed you say about when you were describing, then you have like quite a good awareness of your cardiovascular condition, and I think maybe a lot of people don't have much of an awareness of their physiology. That sounds like another great benefit. Do you think you always sort of knew about your cardiovascular condition?
That kind of awareness, I think you have to build, whether it's about cardiovascular, or I could say the same about my understanding of my nervous system. In the old days, I had the experience of emotions, being stressed, being energized, being exhausted, being whatever. But I think understanding, studying these things and learning about these systems and how they work, learning through yoga and specifically through the synergy stuff on how to regulate, upregulate, downregulate, whatever, you just slowly build it's like the map becomes clearer of your body. It's like if you imagine before you knew anything about what's in here, what's in your chest and in your belly, it's just there's stuff in there. And then you start to realize, there's an esophagus and there's a stomach and there's the intestines and there's a large, and you become a little bit more aware, and then you get some sense of it. That it's like the feelings mean more. The synergy definitely helped. As that story I was sharing before about learning to regulate my nervous system, If I compare that to, say, before I ever started yoga, I would have had no idea. I just would have said, I feel stressed.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my God, I'm sweating. My hands are shaking a little bit.
Yeah.
My breath is really fast. My heart rate's really heavy. I was like, okay, these are all signs. I know what these mean, and what can I do about them? And then I have this toolkit that I've learned to deal with that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, Sometimes you're too overwhelmed or you're too whatever. And you have to find a different strategy other than just, because it almost seems funny, doesn't it? Like once you get to a point where you can relax your pelvic floor and your jaw and do this kind of tricks, it's like, oh yeah, I just lowered my heart rate, and calmed my nervous system down. It sounds a little bit of a fantasy for a lot of people. And I think when especially if you have some sort of like acute nervous system, say anxiety, you need something bigger at first, something more obvious, a bigger break from what you're doing or whatever it is. But eventually you can regulate really subtly.
Mm. Yeah, lovely. So running, regulation, awareness of the organs and the nervous system, and all of that from active movement.
Yeah.
And there's even more we could do with talking about active movement. I just want to thank you for teaching me and for giving me great lessons. I love doing this podcast because I've talked to like Malva, I've talked to Tan Tan, I've talked to Simon, and I'm learning loads from it. It's really exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man, it's cool. I mentioned the core earlier. I used the Indian word khanda, the core. Would you like to say anything about the synergy principle of moving from the core?
I think it's so obvious because, again, what's the opposite of moving from the core? And from a kind of literal perspective, if you don't move from the core, then your core gets moved by something else, the associated movement. If I lift my arms up, then my back will arch. When we say the core, we talk about the trunk. My back will arch. And usually, often, you don't want that movement. So consciously or unconsciously, your core then braces or catches. So your core does turn on, but it often turns on the opposite muscles that you actually want. And again, that example of you lift the arms up, your back muscles turn on, which is probably not what you wanted, because it doesn't control the arch of the back. So again, moving from the core is logical, but it also gives you the benefit of a heap more power. What I mean by that is like literal strength. Like if I have the amount of pushing power I have, say if I'm just pushing my arm forward, like I was doing a push-up, the amount of power that I have from my shoulder is limited. If I move from my torso, from my core, if my whole body is doing that movement, I have more range, I have more strength, I have more pressure. So I actually unlock more strength. And if I unlock more strength, then I unlock more ability. And this is what yoga practitioners, it kind of catches them a little bit more, because you can say, do you want to do fancier things, more advanced things? And almost everybody will say yes. Everybody under the age of 40, anyway, will say yes. So then I say, okay, you've got two options. Either you keep moving the way that you're moving and just get that strength more, or I can teach you a secret, which means you can probably do it already. Because you've got the strength, you were just limiting to say only using your arm muscles for a push-up or for a chaturanga, whatever. But what if you use your whole body for that? There's more strength available. So all of a sudden, you're more able, you're more capable to do different things with your body. And that's really nice. My favorite pose for talking about this principle is actually side crow.
Well, like a twisted crane pose, the knees on the elbow or on the tricep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm twisting to one side. I've got my elbow or my armpit or whatever on one of my legs. My other arm is on my hip or on the same leg, and I'm trying to balance on those hands. And for so many students, that's just like an impossibility. They've been looking at it they've been watching everybody do it for years, and they say, my arms aren't strong enough, or my core's not strong enough. And it's like, yeah, maybe not. And then we learn this, it's the principle of resistance that really helps with this one, but you basically learn to quote unquote engage the core the right way. It's not sucking the belly to the spine. It's by trying to move from the core. And then you just lean forward with your hands on the floor. And for a lot of people, you just presto, your feet are off the ground. You didn't get stronger magically. You just learned to use your body more efficiently. So to summarize all of what I just said, I think moving from the core is just such an efficient way to use your body where you unlock more strength and more ability and reduce your risk of injury exponentially. And we should be doing it all the time. And when we're not doing it, we should be really conscious that we're not doing it and then find some bracing in the core because you've always got to use your core somehow. It has to be involved.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your 4 limbs with this squiggly bit in between getting in the way.
Yeah. It's the opposite of isolating movements and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah. And isolating movements, they have a purpose.
Agreed.
If I've got an injury and if I've got a weakened muscle, if I've got a pattern of movement that's wrong, I have to go down to a more isolated movement. If I want to strengthen one muscle individually because it's weak, or because I want really big biceps, or whatever it is, then it makes sense to isolate a movement. But in every other circumstance, we should be using our whole body holistically. And to use the whole body holistically, we should be moving from the center. Every tradition says the same. I mean, I remember having a conversation with my mum, who is a dancer, about synergy. And she goes, oh my God, this is exactly what we learnt. She did university level dance in contemporary dance at university. And she showed me this book where they were explaining how if you move your arms, you have to move your belly first. Because from the belly to the ribs to the shoulders to the elbows, because that's how you move efficiently. I was like, that's synergy. Everything ends up with the same answers, So yeah, move from the core. Very good thing.
I think another benefit is to appreciate putting the pieces back together as well. Sometimes to take things apart to appreciate the whole. You could say it's a bit of a Western approach, certainly, like sort of historically and, medically and scientifically, it's been this idea of reductionism.
Yes.
But I do sometimes teach isolated movements so that people can discern the difference between the shoulder socket and the shoulder blade, or the hip and the lower spine. And then when they bring it back together, even if they're not consciously thinking about it, I think there is a sort of somatic knowing that comes back with them when they simply move from the core or choose to move in order from the core.
That's a really good point. And you just reminded me of one of the principles of therapy for a joint. So let's say, for example, you've got an issue in your shoulders. It's really important to go back to just moving your shoulders to make sure that they move in a healthy way, to make sure that you are exploring the entire range of motion. Because by using the whole body, by using the core, and therefore every movement, the whole body is integrated, sometimes you work around imbalances or around issues, which is actually a good thing in a lot of ways, because I've got this problem with my shoulder, but I can still move like a normal person because I'm using my whole body. But if I want to fix my shoulder, I have to go back to just my shoulder moving. We do that in the, I don't know what you call it, I think Simon calls it joint synergy.
Right.
I just call it joint movements these days, but in the joint movements practice, you start with one joint moving by itself, and then you kind of add in the associated movements so that you can explore, for example, how your shoulder movement affects your chest and your spine and your hips and whatever, and then you reverse engineer it and go, okay, now you want to move your shoulder, let's move first from the core. But even to learn that, you've got to do the shoulder first.
Oh, wow. You said a big word there, associated movements, because that is something that really fits into these two principles we've talked about, and something that is so missed out. When Simon started talking about associated movements from the initial trainings that I had, I was just like, oh my God, this is such a big missing piece from how most people are informed about movement. Wow.
If you don't understand that moving one joint affects and moves other joints, you're missing out on so much opportunity to move more efficiently, so much opportunity to understand the body better, so much opportunity to have more strength, more flexibility, all of the things that people say that they want from yoga. And it's termed, I had a similar experience when I started speaking and studying with Simon of going, oh my God, this is so important. I'd heard about it before. I was aware of what it was and how it worked, but I didn't kind of rank it that highly as far as, because I was, to kind of loop right the way back to my yoga origin stories, after Sadie, I ended up doing and studying Iyengar for years, Iyengar yoga.
Cool. Which
is very reductionist and very much don't move anything except that one joint. Everything stays the same, but move that one joint this specific direction, And I knew that when I lifted my arms up, to use that example again, that my back wanted to arch, But what I'd been learning with the Iyengar stuff was don't let it. Resist the associated movements.
Right.
I didn't realize how you could use the associated movements to help you.
Yeah.
I always thought they just got in the way.
Wow.
You know?
Massive.
But if you talk to physiotherapists, I really often have physios and stuff come to my course because it's obviously based around those principles that they understand. You know, one was explaining to me on the last teacher training that when you, to use this example again, when you lift the arms up, your neck and your upper back is supposed to arch. And if it doesn't, it's a dysfunction that we have to fix. So if I had learnt perfectly from what I understood my teachers were trying to teach me in Iyengar, that is that my arms move and nothing else moves. That's actually, according to physiotherapists that have been studying last year in Switzerland and in Germany, that's actually teaching my body to do the wrong thing. Associated movements are supposed to happen. That's a healthy body. You know, I turn my arm in, my shoulder goes forward, I round my spine. That's healthy pattern, healthy movement. If I turn my arm in and nothing else happens, that's an unhealthy movement.
And if anyone didn't know it already, Simon and Bianca retrained as physios after recognizing, you know what, this classical yoga approach isn't exactly working for all our, you know, pretty able Australian students. You know, it's and they retrained as physios. And do you think then what I'm taking from this, just as a query, did the idea of associated movements flow in from their physiotherapy knowledge then and integrate into the synergy style, do you think?
I mean, it could have gone either way. And I think that's what's so interesting about the fact that they went and studied physiotherapy, because some of the stories that I can recall from Simon are about learning the physiotherapy principles and then going, that's how it works. Mm-hmm. And other stories about things that they were doing at university in physiotherapy that were rubbish.
Right.
You know, it's like, no, we know better than that.
Okay.
They're outdated, you know, whatever. There's both.
Yeah.
And that's also what I experience with having different physiotherapists come to my courses, is they share with me like, this stuff, like move from the core, for example, they all teach that now.
Cool.
But then they'll often have, but this stuff, it's a bit outdated. We're not so sure about it anymore, because it's an evolving science like everything else, you know. Simon sometimes uses the example of the Aussie physios in the 90s teaching suck the belly to the spine. It was a solution to a problem.
Yes.
It wasn't the best solution. We have better solutions now.
Yeah, that one, so ubiquitous in so many fitness classes that I've been to, even yoga classes, where people talk about it and not understanding, you know, as Simon says, that was actually to mitigate when your spine's injured. That was a cue for injured spines, not healthy spines.
Yeah, and they don't even do it anymore. They like modern physiotherapy courses in Switzerland, Germany and Austria, Australia, whatever, they don't teach that anymore because it's not the best solution. It's a solution. And for very specific circumstances, yes, sometimes it's a strategy. But it's like the old thing of you've got back pain, so you should rest in bed.
Sure.
No one does that anymore. Physiotherapists 30 years ago, that's what they learned.
Was it really that recent?
I might be wrong about the timestamp.
I thought that was a bit more of an archaic one, that bed rest idea.
You know, there's ideas that evolve. Like we under the world, even sometimes you think we understand something as the truth, and then we realize that we were wrong. The Earth isn't flat, or whatever the example you want to give. Like our understanding evolves. What's interesting with something like the body and movement is that our understanding is still evolving really quickly, and different parts of the world go faster than others. And that's why I keep saying Swiss and German, because honestly, from the conversations I've had, they are like at the pinnacle. These Central and Northern European universities and stuff, they're evolving really, really fast. Whereas if you talk to someone who's done physiotherapy in India, they don't necessarily have the same up-to-date information.
Yeah.
I've got a great friend in Sri Lanka who's a physiotherapist, and he went and studied he studied in Sri Lanka, then he went to the UK and did a few years there, and he's like, dude, we are like 30 years behind. Mm-hmm. Like he went to the UK and we're learning, we used to teach this, that and the other, but we don't anymore. He's like, I learned that last year.
Yeah, man.
You know, that's
ouch.
Awkward. And the same thing's happening to bring us back to yoga. The same thing's happening in yoga. Like there's a lot of old information still being taught. There's much better information out there, but some teachers are still saying arms up, shoulders down, big breath into the chest or whatever it is.
But I appreciate about you, Stefan, is that you started with that adept scientific perspective. Like, you wanted to try it out yourself. I think that's one of the biggest things that you can't help but teach, is that you are genuinely curious, and that's infectious in a beautiful way to just tickle people's curiosity. Yeah, I respect it.
I was lucky in a sense that I had this really nasty injury that I had to I was using yoga to try and resolve it. So I was, and I was also lucky that in practicing yoga, I got every other injury that you could get from yoga. Because I started with this vinyasa rubbish. Belly in, chest up, shoulders back and down. I stuffed my shoulder, I stuffed my wrist, I stuffed my neck, all from yoga.
Wow, man.
So then I had to fix those things and try and figure out what I was doing wrong. It turns out I have a very fragile body, and it's been painful. But I've been able to learn so much. I wouldn't know half as much as I would about the back if I hadn't hurt my back. And the same thing with the shoulder, because I had to fix my shoulder and my wrist and my neck. So now when a student comes with one of the common yoga injuries, even bloody yoga butt, I've had that too, the overstretching of the hamstring, I'm a perfect test case for overdoing things.
Okay, but we're not going to stretch that so far as to say, hey guys, just don't listen to what we're saying. Just go and injure yourself to learn. Like, wisdom is like, there's this, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like, intelligence is like learning from, your experience, but wisdom is learning from others.
Exactly. So we've done that stuff. You don't have to learn the same way that we did, Simon's also got some great stories about like his fractures in his wrists and stuff.
Oh man. Crazy. So many injuries. Like, you guys really have that in cahoots.
We can hopefully help other people avoid those injuries rather than go through their own learning journey.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yeah, I think a lot of time can save. That evolutionary process can be sped up with that, with that diligent learning and teaching.
Exactly right.
I wonder whether we've got time to just quickly zip over with natural breathing and flow.
Let's do it. So give me a question for natural breathing.
Let's do a Camilleri. What is unnatural breathing?
I like it. That's a very good question. What would be the opposite of natural breathing? Natural breathing is hopefully breathing the way that your body wants to breathe, but I would actually add a comma on that, and that would be, for some circumstances and some people, retraining how to breathe in a healthy way. They might be breathing through their mouth, into their chest, too much, whatever. So for some people, there's some retraining involved to learn how to breathe, into the nose or through the nose, into the belly with the diaphragm, not too much, which is how I would categorize healthy, a very quick summary of healthy breathing. So unnatural breathing in a yoga class would be breathing most commonly far more than is necessary. And the biggest problem in the short term with that is that it's eliciting the stress response. You think about when something stressful is happening, we tend to take a big breath. We tend to breathe more than normal. Now, why do we do that? Because our body's getting ready to fight or flight, to have a fight with something or to run away from something, and we need a little bit more oxygen. The thing is, if you breathe more than normal outside of a stressful situation, your nervous system, your endocrine system, everything thinks that you're in a stressful situation because it gets this thing that's normally happening when you're under stress. Okay, so we're breathing more than normal, must be under stress. Let's tense our muscles. Let's speed up the heart rate. Let's dilate the pupils in the eyes. Let's use a different part of the brain for thinking that's less rational. And you get all of these kind of stress response markers, which are not very beneficial. So in the short term, you don't want to be stressed, so you don't want to breathe too much, basically. You want to breathe normally. When a yoga teacher is instructing 1 breath per movement, which is less these days, but I still see it sometimes, or I still hear about it sometimes, you're encouraging your students to hyperventilate, which is going to put them in the stress response. If you're, as a yoga student, yoga practitioner, breathing more than normal when you practice, big breath in, big sigh out, big breath in, big sigh out, then you're eliciting the stress response in your body. And that's just talking about the short-term effects of that. The long-term effects of that, to quote Simon, is cancer. But quite seriously though, like if you have a bad breathing pattern, there's too much breathing in particular, there's all sorts of negative long-term potential effects. And if you want to think about what some of those might be, just think about long-term stress and some of the negative outcomes of long-term stress. And I can give an anecdote to this one. My mum, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And kidney cancer is a bit of a random one. And they were trying to figure out what risk factors she had. They're like, do you smoke? She's like, no. Okay. Do you drink? No. Okay. What's your diet like? She's like, mostly vegetarian, lots of vegetables. Oh, okay. Do you exercise? Yeah. Okay. And they're like, what? This doesn't make sense. Stress. And she's like, oh yeah, like you wouldn't believe. And I said, well, most likely cause of this cancer is your kidneys dealing with all the stress hormones, breaking down all the stress hormones. So it can give you cancer. Like literally, there's an anecdote to kind of prove the point. Everyone wants to be more relaxed. So if you want to be more relaxed, one of the quickest ways we can regulate that is by breathing less, breathing naturally, breathing normally, and not going to yoga classes and over breathing. Will you give me a minute to explore something on that though that's a little bit more interesting?
Love to hear it.
The sigh.
Sure.
So, teachers will say, take a big breath in through the nose, sigh out through the mouth, and it feels relaxing. And the teacher will say that, the students will do it, and the students will feel it. And there is a huge amount of research that backs up that a physiological sigh, which is a big breath in, sometimes a huge or a double breath in, and a sigh out, is a trigger for your parasympathetic nervous system or is a trigger for relaxation. So there's a contradiction here because we're saying don't breathe more than normal because breathing more than normal creates stress. But I'm also saying sighing is relaxing. Like heaps of evidence to suggest that sighing is relaxing. So where are we going wrong here? Is it the same thing or not? What do you think?
Oh, thanks for bringing me into that. My mind is going to Simon referring to Wim Hof, and he talks about having spoken with Wim Hof and talking about maybe doing a collab one day but never getting around to it. And that how Wim Hof has taken influence from yogic practices. But, Simon's concerned that people won't catch up with the other side. And I've heard him say that the only reason to hyperventilate is so that you can hypoventilate more effectively and for longer afterwards. Yeah. Funnily enough, in the last couple of months, actually, I've started more often beginning my classes with people lay on the back and doing a little bit of hyperventilation, because I think it sort of helps in that, I'm talking about this kind of, I alluded to earlier, desensitized predisposition of society at large, modernity, and actually to grasp people, whether they do aggressive fitness things or whatever. The equivalent of that is to just start with where they're at, which is hyperventilation, and then sighing through the mouth is really interesting to hear the benefit of that. I wonder if there's more to that. But just to quickly respond, I think hyperventilation is great, but as a minimal, just as a kind of starter, and just to kind of help people get into the zone from what they're maybe more familiar with, which is a busy lifestyle and a stressful start to their yoga class.
I mean, you're bang on, is that hyperventilation needs to be followed by hypoventilation. And the thing about the sigh is that if you do an experiment and you do one big sigh, what do you do after without thinking about it? You don't breathe very much.
Right.
You take a big sigh and then most people will just let that hang out. And that's your body self-regulating. So a sigh is relaxing. A sigh doesn't end up being hyperventilation if it's a sigh. Problem being is what do you hear sometimes in yoga classes? You hear 5 sighs.
Right.
10 sighs. 20 sighs. That's hyperventilation. Like it's such a simple thing. A sigh, great trigger for parasympathetic nervous system. 5 sighs in a row, hyperventilation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different thing because in yogic practices, in pranayama, for example, there is heaps of hyperventilation exercises, but they are all followed by kumbhaka. They're all followed by hypoventilation. In a yoga class like you teach, that's brilliant. Hyperventilation, to upregulate the nervous system a little bit at the start of class also. It's brilliant. You need energy. Get a bit stressed. Yoga is stressful. That sounds contradictory. But, doing warrior two, that's not a relaxing pose, is it? Doing a handstand, that's not relaxing, is it? So maybe some extra breathing before those things or during those things might happen. But then after, what do? You do Shavasana. Even if you're not saying breathe less than normal, you're probably not. You're probably just saying relax. You breathe less than normal when you're relaxing. So we regulate in that way, Yes, the physiological sigh, really beneficial, but 1, maybe 2, definitely not 400 of them. Not to the point of hyperventilation. It gets rid of the point. So, yeah.
So maybe the listener can enjoy a nice little sigh before we move on.
Why not? Take a sigh. Take a big breath in through the nose. And you know what? You can breathe out through the mouth if you want, but you don't need to. The nose is also fine. The mouth is just what people kind of want to do because it makes a sound. It feels good. It's what you think of a sigh. You don't think of a sigh as being through the nose. You think of a sigh being out the mouth. So whatever, it doesn't matter. But 1, maybe 2, that's enough.
I think there's another thing in there, actually, which is that larynx movement and the voicing, the voiced breath, I think, because I just felt like when I did my sigh now, I was like, it's like I'm getting that like beautiful, like gentle massage from the vibration of the sound in, and it's a nice little Vishuddhi activation, right? You're just about to ask people to listen, and that communication portal of the neck is for listening and speaking, as I understand it.
From a physiological perspective, making a sound has the added benefit of slowing the breath. The slower the breath, the less you're breathing. It also gives your brain something else to concentrate on that isn't thinking. Anything that's not thinking is relaxing for the brain to do. Watching, observing. It's not trying to work out the problems of the world anymore. It's listening to a sound.
Ooh, that's a big, interesting pin there about watching, observing brain relaxation.
I mean, there's a whole nother rabbit hole.
I'm going to make a note of that so that we can hopefully get around to talking about that another time.
If I just really quickly on that, because the ears might have pricked up, is that if you're thinking about stuff, most of the time for a lot of people, that's stress. Yeah, you're trying to work things out. It's not like pleasant daydreaming for a lot of people. So the first stage to psychological relaxation, not physiological being the body, psychological being the mind, is just to give the mind something else to do that isn't thinking. That's mindfulness.
Yeah, wow.
Watch things, observe things. Don't work things out. Don't look at the wall and go, is that the right color? Oh my God, the corners needs to be repainted, whatever. It's rather just, it's a red wall, Okay, it's a red. And then that's not thinking anymore. That's psychological relaxation.
God, that's juicy. Thank you. My brain says thanks. So what about flow? Tell me about the synergy principle, if you are so willing, of flow.
Okay, what's the opposite of flow?
Well, I'm saying this as someone that's explored it a bit, jerky, jarring, and linear.
Yeah. I mean, and if we think about a lot of the way modern yoga is advertised, it's advertised as fluid. It's advertised as flow yoga, vinyasa yoga, movement-based yoga. So obviously the movement itself is important. And like you said, that jarring, if we were to move somewhere and stop and then move the opposite direction and stop and then that stopping is not just stopping our movement, but it's also creating a bit of a shockwave through our body, which is this stress response thing again. But I don't want to overstate it because it's the hardest one it's very obvious that we should move from the core. It's very obvious that we should breathe naturally. But moving fluidly is more about joining in my just what I'm kind of coming up with now, a way of joining all those other things together so that it doesn't all of a sudden have this stop-start discomfort, but rather it becomes this softer, dancier, smoother, whatever. And it's actually what I think most yoga practitioners like to do and like to see anyway. I think back to my first yoga teacher trainer, Dominique Santana Salerno at the Australian Yoga Academy. And she wasn't a synergy person, but she would say, your movements should look and feel like Tai Chi.
There you go.
I loved I loved that. And it just would bring some mindfulness into it. Like, don't make your movement like this. Think about how you can smooth it out. Even just that was something. So yeah, just think about what's the opposite. Move fluidly or move in a strict, jarring, uncomfortable way. You choose. I'd much rather move fluidly.
What is it that makes it harder to define, though? Because you alluded to it being sort of less obvious. What do you think is less obvious about it?
I think to try and explain the benefits versus the risks.
Right, okay.
So if we're talking about the breath, it's easy. Breathe more than normal, you're stressed. Breathe less than normal, you're relaxed. But moving fluidly, like, benefits feels really good. It ties everything together. But it's not as obvious as, like, down regulates your nervous system in an obvious way. I would argue that it does, but it has to kind of work around. It's a calming, if it feels good, yada, yada, yada. And the same thing with the drawbacks of moving in a jerky way. Like, you could say, there's some extra risk of injury. It's not as relaxing, whatever, but it's just less a clear, obvious line. It doesn't mean I think it's any less valuable. I think we should all be moving fluidly. But it's a little bit harder to make a statement on it.
Can I share with you mine then?
Please, yes. Maybe you can teach me. That'd be awesome.
I enjoyed a semester at Stanford University when I looked at it on YouTube.
Okay.
Robert Sapolsky, there's his evolutionary biology semester on YouTube, and I enjoyed all 23 lectures that were available or whatever. And he talked at one point about blood vessels and the phenomenon that they cover 99% of the body, and yet they're only like a very, very, very small proportion of the mass of the body. And he said that there's a sort of fractal nature to it, but that it also, blood vessels have this curious trait of existing on 3.2 dimensions. And
3.2 dimensions.
So they're like really flat structures, right? But they move amongst three-dimensional space. So they're sort of multi-dimensional by nature. And then my understanding of flow is that you're using combinations of dimensions of movement. So for example, the forearm, I turn it to pronate and supinate, and then I bend or straighten the elbow. If I mix those two movements, then I'm going to move across multiple planes and dimensions of movement and serve the flow of blood on this kind of spiral. The body and even the muscular, so that's one reason, but the body and muscular structures, they're designed to deal with not just 3 dimensions, but, really 4 if we account for movement as well. So why would we move in 2-dimensional space? Why would we isolate our movement to just, back and then forth? But also, I love the way Simon teaches it. It's like really practically. It's like, just try bending your elbow without turning the arm, and then try bending your elbows and turning the arm. You can literally feel the difference. Like, so that's the one really nice other approach that I'll use.
I hadn't thought about circulation, but that is such a huge benefit of fluid movement, is just to encourage the circulation of blood and fluids and energy and whatever you want to think about through the body, which is something that circulation is something I think people don't think about when they think about movement or exercise. I really don't think that's on people's agenda when they go, okay, I need to do exercise. We think of generally 3 benefits, I would argue, of exercise: getting stronger, getting more flexible, and getting more stamina. But people don't often think of improving circulation. But we should, because, you want injuries to heal quickly. You want to stay younger for longer. You want healthy joints and whatever. Like, what do you need?
Yeah.
Circulation.
Where does cancer thrive? It's in an environment of low oxygen, meaning that blood's not getting to areas.
Exactly. But people think circulation is the heart, which obviously is the most important thing, so that your heart's working. But the heart needs the help of these other systems. And it's a whole other topic we could talk about for another 3 hours. But
I'll put it on the list for next time.
Yeah, please.
As well as brain relaxation by observation being mindfulness. That was a beautiful little pin you put up for us there.
Yeah.
So I'll put that on a list to chat about next time. And I'd like to draw it to a close now. But I don't know if you feel there's anything that we could sort of tie our conversation together with, or if you just have anything that's on your mind and heart to share.
Oh, there's been so much we've covered, but I think we've covered a lot of it just through the lens of synergy, of yoga synergy. And maybe if there was one thing to summarize, is there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of benefit to yoga and to movement practices and everything else. But I would argue that synergy has something special within that, as far as the way that it's been put together, the science behind it, and the benefits and the lack of risk that I believe is present there. So I would just, for anyone who hasn't heard about it before or hasn't looked into it before, look up yoga synergy. Do some research. It's the bomb.
And you've been teaching teachers for a few years now, predominantly in that style, am I correct to say?
Yeah, I was teaching for some years before I started Synergy trainings. So that was awkward because I had to kind of undo I had to rewrite all my course. But there's been some hundreds of students now go through the Synergy version of the teach training, and then they go off and they teach people, and it's really special. Some of them now even run their own teach trainings, which is kind of crazy to think about.
What do you love about it?
Stuff that I feel should be obvious to us about the way we use our bodies and our minds and this kind of stuff. I feel like we need to learn this stuff at school, like about breathing into the belly, like such simple things, or about how the body works, or the physiology, the non-violent communication stuff, all of it. Just stuff that can, like little things that can help people's lives beyond just practicing better, which is obviously really good too. But
so you love these aha moments of being able to help people's lives.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I have such bizarre experience with this because I often get now these way overqualified, hyper-intelligent people who teach me things. Research, like last training, I had 2 research scientists.
Nice.
And, one of them was studying the biology on genetically modified rats. And she said after one lecture, she's like, I just had a revelation about something that you said in reference to the research that I was doing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's unreal. Because I don't know anything. I just compared to these people. But we learn from each other. I love that because, any teach training, I get a whole new list of things that I've learned, and then I get to share that with the next group.
I see a metaphor for that in the environment you're creating, learning from the people that you're with, and that cohesion of knowledge. Because when you talked about the 4 principles, especially the first 2, they really blended into each other when you were describing them. And I think that's, there's like a sort of blending quality to your approach of it as well that is really nice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I am so hungry for more, but I think time's just against us, and it would be an absolute pleasure to hear your evolution the next time it comes around. But in the meantime, I think people can find you on Instagram, and if that's one of your major outlets, and where can people find you? What's the website? Do you use that, or how do you reach people?
I would just encourage people to look up lankayoga.lk, web, Instagram, whatever, and that's the place where I'm doing all this good stuff. So
amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure, brother. Thank you
really
too.
has.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thanks, brother. Thanks, mate.
Let's talk again.
We'll do it again.
Yay. Bye for now.
But it's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you. Synergy has something special. 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 As far as the science behind it. As far as the science behind it. As far as the science behind it. And the lack of risk. 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 For anyone who hasn't heard about it before. Do some research. It's the bomb. The needs that you're meeting. Are not only to have a better understanding. Or for knowledge. We also have other needs. have other needs. The need to feel important. The need to be doing my best. The need not to hurt other people. All these others. Mindfulness. Watch things. Observe things. Don't work things out. It's rather just. It's a red wall. You know? That's not thinking anymore. That's psychological relaxation.